Brilliant. Right, let's kick this off. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again for our Joint Partners webinar. Today, we are going to be focusing on the proposed new mountain training bouldering qualification, something that's been talked about for a while, and Guy is here from Mountaineering England to give us an update of what the current thoughts are, what the results of that survey is, and ask you guys a few questions so we can all help feed into the process. Welcome back, Dave. Yes, I am Robert Mackenzie. I'm going to be your host once again. Apologies if you're sick of my voice after all of these webinars, but I love doing this. So you're stuck with me. Yes, I'm Robert Mackenzie. I am from Mountaineering Scotland, and I will be your host this morning. I'll be handing over to our main panelist, Guy, in a second, who's going to run through the presentation. And then I will be back a little bit later on for the question and answer section. The schedule for the day is really simple. We don't have many speakers this time, so it's going to be me handing over to Guy doing his presentation, and then back for the question and answer. And again, we'll try and wrap up latest 11:30. That will all depend on how many questions we get. So please don't feel shy to throw up questions at us. So who is Guy Jarvis? Guy Jarvis is the Executive Officer for Mountain Training England. He's been with Mountain Training England for 7 years now, and he's been part of this specific project from the beginning. So definitely the best person to be throwing all the complicated, difficult questions at. Glad he's here. Once Guy's finished his presentation, there will be the usual opportunity for questions and answers. And during that, we will be joined hopefully by Anna Comers from the Association of British Climbing Walls, Abby Blakey from NICAS, Jane Carney from Mountaineering Ireland might be joining us, and potentially a small army from the MTUKI working group on this, including Dave Ayton and Dan Middleton. You guys are here. That's brilliant. We might have a few more people joining in later on, but we'll see how that one goes. Yes, this is a brilliant group of people to be talking about this topic. But before we kick off, a little bit of housekeeping. If you need captions, I know this was a big topic during the last webinar, was having live captions. If you need captions, at the bottom of your screen, there is a show captions option. If you just click on that, it should give you live captions running at the bottom of the screen. If you can't get that, leave a message in the chat function and I'll try and help you out. If you have any questions at any point or comments on anything that Guy is saying, I will be keeping track of the question and answer function throughout all of this. So if you've got any questions or comments at any point, throw it in that question and answer function. At the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A button there. It'll bring you to that. Please feel free. Don't be shy. Throw anything, any of your thoughts, chuck it in there. We'll try and get questions answered as much as we can at the end. Now, we only have a short amount of time at the end. We are limited in time, so we might not get a chance to go through all of the questions, but don't worry, I am keeping track of all of these questions as they're coming in. And after this, we will be getting the questions answered and sending it out to all of the attendees in some way. This is also being recorded and will be put up on the Climb Scotland YouTube account, along with all of the other webinars in time. In a couple of weeks' time, we will get that video up on YouTube. So if you can't stick around for the entire session and want to catch up, or you know people that couldn't make this session and would love to catch up on what the discussion is, the option will be there to catch up on the YouTube in time. And the questions will be getting answered and sent out to you. So, one last thing, during Guy's presentation, he has a couple of questions that he'd like to ask you guys. These questions will be popping up periodically as poll questions. The section, unfortunately, doesn't let you type your own comments into it. So when prompted by the questions, please leave any comments, answers, other questions in the question and answer section, and I will keep track of all of them. Please do not be shy. So, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Guy. Can I ask all of my other panelists to hide their screens and mute themselves? And I will see you a little bit later on for the question and answer section. Guy, over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I can't see you all, but I'm still going to say thanks for turning up. This is really important to us as much as I hope you'll be interested, because the timing is perfect. The Mountain Training decided at its last full UK meeting to go ahead and develop a bouldering qualification. The reasons why I'll get to in my little presentation. And so what they've done is set up what's called a working group. At the moment, it comprises about 10 individuals from Mountain Training, some sort of consultant experts and people from the industry to look at this. We have the 2 surveys, which I'll go over the results of to consider. So we've had a lot of really good quality feedback there. But the timing of this is perfect, because this is a chance for us to get some more sort of qualitative feedback, as they say, comments from you. So, by all means, ask any questions you want, but we really want to hear from you too. And the working group meets for the first time tonight. This will take a while to develop, because we need to work out exactly what it is that the sector wants. We think we've got a pretty good steer with the survey, but I'm hoping through this seminar and other avenues that we can finesse that. So yeah, really good opportunity to communicate with you about our ideas and then you to feedback, so that we get the best possible fit for the best number of people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. This is always the bit that makes me nervous, but hopefully this will work. And just set up my slideshow. Yeah, developing a bouldering instructor qualification. What does that involve, and how have we got to this point? Why have we decided this? So, I know how to advance this, he says. There we go. They do hide them. Lovely. Okay, well, first thing, just to explain about Mountain Training's role in all this. It's not our interest to sort of foist any qualification on anybody. We're not in the business of trying to create as many qualifications as we can to make as much money as we can. We're a charity anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. It's all just work for us. Our kind of mission, if you like, is shown there on the left-hand side. And fundamentally, we're here to support activity and quality activity, because there are risks involved in the activities, in the sports and activities that we support. And so we primarily do that through skills training and through qualifying leaders. So we are the national awarding body. And I should say that I talk about Mountain Training as one entity. We are actually about 5 different national mountain training bodies, but we are working very much together as one on this project. And before I go on, I just want to point out something. If you look at this graph here, it shows what we've been doing, I suppose, in one snapshot over the last 15 years. And it's the blue and the grey lines I'd like you to see. The significance of the blue line, which is the total number of candidates that we have registering for all of our qualifications. These stats are for England, by the way, but they will be replicated in the other countries. You can see that although it's gone down and then up again, the bottom line is that we have the same number of people registering for our qualifications today as we did 15 years ago. But, and this is the significance, if you look at the number of people who have gained our qualifications, who have actually passed them, it's nearly doubled in that period. Well, we're pretty sure that the reason that has happened is because we have listened very carefully to the sector and tried to supply what they need rather than what we think they need. And therefore, that's led to a much broader range of qualifications than was the case back 15 years ago. And therefore, we get people qualified to the level that they need to be. And that's why we have more qualifications now than we did 15 years ago, where people might have struggled with the only qualifications that were on offer. I say that because that, of course, underpins part of our decision to move ahead with a bouldering qualification. Right. So, yeah, what is the rationale then for a bouldering qualification? And as Robert said, this this has been bubbling up for some time. We performed a massive climbing awards review of all of our climbing qualifications. It started in 2015 and finished about 2018. And we did change a lot of qualifications, and we looked at the bouldering qualification, but at the time, the sort of research that we didn't really indicate that there was quite enough demand for it and that it was necessarily needed, although plenty of people were still asking for one even back then. Of course, what's happened since then? Well, the continued massive growth in bouldering participation, also the growth in coaching, and of course in facilities. COVID doesn't seem to have put a dampener really on the bouldering wall that much in the bouldering world. So a few statistics from ABC surveys: 44% of all ABC walls currently are now bouldering only centres. But then if you look at the larger ones, it's actually 75% of all large walls are bouldering only. But more significantly, looking forwards, 95% of all new ABC applications or applicant walls are bouldering only. So there were 38 new bouldering only centres created last year. Why is that an issue? Well, the survey also says that a key challenge that's cited by managers of the all climbing walls, but bouldering walls too, is recruiting good quality staff. And when it comes to bouldering only centres, the vast majority will have their own in-house training schemes, because the only qualification that mountain training has to offer at the moment is the climbing wall instructor qualification. And that, for obvious reasons, is not attractive to bouldering only centres, because they don't want to have to become experienced in and then train in and then be assessed in roped climbing. Bouldering, of course, is now an Olympic sport, and we should have a full coaching pathway, including safe supervision from the grassroots upwards. And at the moment, it's still a little bit disjointed, because we've got this mixture of national and in-house schemes. It's on the back of the climbing walls review I talked about that concluded in 2018, we did address bouldering supervision to some extent, in that we created guidance and have published that on the supervision of bouldering. And we did that with the ABC input as well. And that guidance is there for both indoor bouldering and outdoor bouldering. So we've already, if you like, got some agreed content on what good supervision looks like. So why a national qualification as opposed to in-house training? Well, they can bring a consistent quality. So you've got a consistent standard across the whole of the country, and that opens up pathways for people because you get broader recognition. I'll go into the advantages of that later. And you then building up a kind of a standard development pathway for anybody anywhere in the UK who wants to progress as a supervisor, to an instructor, to a coach, at whatever level, from grassroots to elite. And ultimately, that's what we want to try and do, in order to then have more competent people, more qualified people supporting more activity. It can also ease the training, quality assurance burden and liability on bouldering walls if they want to effectively use a national scheme that's already there and well recognised, rather than have to do that all in-house. And of course, there's no reason why you can't run both schemes. When I ran a climbing wall, which I did down in Bristol for about 12 years, we had a mixture of nationally qualified people and in-house training, either alongside it or on top. So yes, hopefully by coming up with some national qualification, we should be able to establish minimum entry standards in instructing and coaching, and enable more people to grow a quality workforce. And don't forget, this is both for the voluntary and professional sector. So we are very interested in commercial climbing walls views, but we're also very interested in a large and wide body of voluntary organisations who are interested in delivering bouldering sessions themselves, either through centres or their own facilities. Okay. So to the survey, earlier this year, we put out 2 surveys, actually, one to individuals and one specifically designed to organisations. And for this sort of survey, I think we had a really good response, 850 individual responses, but significantly 210 different organisations. Now, an organisation could be a single climbing wall or a whole chain of climbing walls, but equally it could be a big national organisation like the Scouts or D&V, or it could be everything in between, you know, youth organisations, schools, all sorts of ranges of user groups, clubs as well, adult and junior. So what did we come back with? Well, overall, 71% of the individuals and 82% of all the organisations who responded said that they think this would be good for the sector, and nearly 80% of all the organisations said they would recognise such a qualification and would use it for both their own staff and visiting external instructors. 1 or 2 organisations said they would put up to 50 or more candidates through a year. So there does seem to be demand. The top 3 advantages that they cited were being a nationally recognised qualification. This means it's better recognised by insurers or authorities, and therefore that can really help in getting things set up. Being quality assured, quality assurance, I would say, after 60 years of doing this as an organisation is really what our sort of brand and our forte is all about. We have teams of accredited providers all over the country, and a great deal of work goes into quality assuring every course, so that we know that training and assessment is being done to the same standard. And having that consistent national standard therefore means that that qualification, of course, is portable, and that once you've got that qualification, for us, we would hope that you could take it pretty much anywhere in the UK. Okay, so yeah, as it said here, 83% of organisations in support of such a qualification for their own staff. And then when we asked about, well, what would you like this qualification to look like, we got a very broad range, but if you boil it down to the answers, it's really saying, well, we need a basic safety supervisor first, but they wanted a bit more than that. They wanted this person to be able to basically run a quality session, a quality single session, so that they could structure it, so it wasn't all sort of random, and you know, they had some of the basic components in there, like, you know, running a really good warm up and being able to you know, teach basics with looking at things like some movement skills. And of course, we need to address the obvious things like safeguarding from the beginning and inclusion. Okay. We did also, as we had the opportunity, ask about outdoor bouldering and whether people were interested in something along that line. Of course, we have the rock climbing instructor, which covers bouldering as well. And the other points I've just put at the bottom here to be aware of is that it is, we believe, a licensable activity, and therefore there are, if you like, restrictions on would be restrictions on using such a qualification if you're working with under 18s, in that you would need an ALA license if you were doing that commercially. So given that context, 36% of the individuals supported the idea, with 48 saying no, and 33% of the organisations were keen, whereas 39 were definitely not, the others, of course, not being sure. And there were many comments about the rock climbing instructor being appropriate, not from everybody, but they were there. So I think the conclusion is that, yeah, there was a sort of definitely a reasonable minority that were keen for it. It says here 40% of organisations, 30% of individuals. But at this time, given that we've got the RCI, given that we've got the issue with licensing, the council decided not to pursue an outdoor qualification at the time. So the focus is on an indoor bouldering qualification. So that leaves us really now to work out then with the working group what the content, the structure, and the pathways of such a qualification should be. And this is really where you come in, because we'd like a bit more feedback. fundamentally, we need to consider the balance between the accessibility of such a qualification, how easy it is to gain, versus the quality. You put it up to super high quality, at its extreme, you find only, a few dozen people in the country could even achieve it. At the other end, you shovel it out to anybody, incredibly easy to get, and you get something that's not very high quality. So one of the questions that we need to establish is, what should that entry point standard be? Bearing in mind that this would be designed as an entry point qualification. I've already said it must work for both the voluntary and the commercial sector. And there must be opportunity for progression. So if this is an entry point qualification, is that going to be useful in its own right? And then does our existing coaching scheme work alongside that to provide progression? Because in bouldering, the obvious line of progression will be in increasing your coaching skills, because the technical safety issues can largely be dealt with. They don't get more complicated, like moving into multi-pitch climbing line. It does need to be flexible. No two instructors are the same. No two instructors have exactly the same needs, and therefore I think continuing professional development and in-house training will always still be relevant. We're not trying to sort of take over the world here at all. We're just trying to produce something that hopefully will be useful for the sector. I've already talked about the guidance that's already been published with ABC input and support, and it may be that turns out to be a really good base for such a qualification. And finally, we've all learned from COVID. 2023, we are much more aware of digital delivery, and it may be that there are more innovative ways that we can deliver some of the training and even assessment using blended delivery or digital resources, which we have just started to do with some of our qualifications. Okay, so this is the current map of the climbing pathway, as we call it, with our existing qualifications. And you can see there the indoor climbing qualifications are currently the indoor climbing assistant, climbing wall instructor, and the climbing wall development instructor. And although they cover bouldering, all three of those cover bouldering, they are not bouldering specific. And for the reasons I said earlier, particularly about the growth of bouldering only centres, this is where our interest is coming. But also on the right-hand side, you've got the coaching pathway that is parallel to it. Now, obviously, other sports don't do it like that. The very first course you go on would be a coaching qualification, and then you'll get different levels of coaching. We have got this structure partly because historically we've had sort of, if you like, safety-based qualifications first, because they are risk activities. But also it actually makes it more flexible for us if we can keep it this way, because those coaching qualifications can be used with indoor and outdoor qualifications at various levels, and therefore it gives great flexibility with the pathway. So, for example, you could have a foundation coach who's a qualified mountaineering instructor, and then I've just noticed we've got the old names there. This is an old theory, yes, that says mountaineering instructor. It should be the mountaineering and climbing instructor, but you get the idea. Or you could have somebody who is a climbing wall instructor who is, a development coach. So that flexibility works for us, and I want to basically check in with you guys that you think it could work with a bouldering instructor qualification. Okay, so where do we go from here? The development process is that we've had the surveys, and we'll get feedback from you today. Anybody can write into us at any time, and we do have quite a bit of feedback from different organisations and individuals, which is useful, and it all gets listened to, and that will all get fed into the working group that I talked about, that is meeting for the first time tonight. So the working group is comprised of Mountain Training UK and Ireland members, some staff like me, and also external experts. And we may also bring in some specialist consultants to advise on particular topics, like I said, like safeguarding and EDI and such forth. So the working group is going to work on and present proposals ultimately to the Mountain Training Council. The Mountain Training Council, if you like, is the deciding body here as to whether it goes ahead. And represented on there are all sorts of bodies, all the mountain training bodies, but also all the mountaineering councils around the UK. And there's also input from the likes of NICAS, ABC, and other partners. So, yeah, it is down to the council ultimately to approve any proposals when they're ready to be presented. And the working group will take its time to make sure that it's confident about what it's proposing after all the consultation that we're doing. The best case scenario is that a new qualification could emerge quite early in 2024. That's only going to happen if it aligns what we decide we want is quite similar to the guidance that we've already published, because then it'd be relatively easy to convert that into a qualification. If we think we need something quite different, then we might take a little bit more time. But I'm very hopeful that a new qualification will appear at least sometime in 2024, assuming that it is approved. Okay, so that's it. That's, as it were, all the background. And now really it is over to you. And I've got a range of questions. So what I'll do is, there aren't too many. I'll just rattle through them, and then we can see what people think. Right, so Robert has popped up here some questions for us already, which is great. I'll tell you what, on my slideshow, it says the same ones. So I'll just ping them up there. Yeah, you can see here the first one. What role description of a bowling wall instructor, I'm just using bowling wall instructor as a working title, would be most useful? And by that, I mean, what is it would you want these people to be able to do? Do you, at the most simple end, just want them to be able to look after people in a bowling wall so they're safe? That's got to be the minimum, hasn't it? The absolute minimum. So that would just be a supervisor, wouldn't it, really? Or would you like them at the other end of the scale to be all singing and dancing, know everything about bouldering, and are an amazing coach? Well, we all know it takes a long time to develop a very good coach. So I don't think that's really credible. But it's how far on the continuum, how much more than just the absolute basics would you like them to do, the skills that they have and the knowledge that they have? Bearing in mind that the more we put into a qualification, the higher the requirements will be for people to even register onto that scheme, the longer the training course will have to be, and the more involved the assessment will have to be. And therefore, of course, the more time and the more expense it would take. So yeah, there we go. In more detail, what knowledge, skills and behaviours would you like them to have, and how easy access? So that's great. Right, Robert.
Can I just chip in, Guy, and just a reminder to answer this question, please use the question and answer section. So please do not be shy. There's a couple of comments in there already, but please don't be shy. Answer to that question. Please stick it in the question and answer.
Brilliant. I mean, this feedback is really useful to us in helping, as I say, to fashion this qualification. And for me, the fundamental is at what level we pitch it. Once we know what level, what standard the sector would like this pitched at to be most useful, I think we've got the expertise amongst us, or access to expertise amongst us, to then write it. So the sort of the detail I'm less concerned about. It's more about where on that continuum do you think they should be? A basic supervisor, something a bit more than that, or something a lot more than that? Yeah. And you know, if you think there are essential knowledge, skills and behaviours, tell us. But if you want to chuck in the kitchen sink, just beware of what that means. That means a lot of time and money, I'm afraid.
Good, excellent. So while I'm still keeping track of all the questions and answers that are coming in, please keep them coming. They've been really good, some really good stuff at the moment. I will be feeding questions to Guy as we go along, but as I'm still catching up from our other panelists, have you guys got any questions to kick us off here? You're all muted, remember. Nope, silence in the room.
I'll ask a question I've seen coming up in the Q&A, Guy, which is about the age of potentially entry to this. Did you have any thoughts?
Okay, so all of our qualifications, if you are going to be responsible for supervising, leading, coaching, guiding, instructing, whatever term you want to use, others in a risk activity, you have to be 18 to assume that full responsibility in law. This is one of the reasons why we introduced the indoor climbing assistant, because particularly in the indoor context, actually it's true for outdoors, we want to try and bridge that gap between being a participant and being an independent leader, as a catch-all term. And that can cover both bouldering or road climbing. And we do see already that something like 90% of the people who go for the indoor climbing assistant are juniors. They are 16, 17 years old, and they are your typical long-standing squad academy member who have been in and around climbing walls, completed NICAS, all the rest of it for years, frankly know their way around a climbing wall better than most adults, and are really useful as assistants, but are not old enough to be on their own responsible in law, unfortunately, for groups. Yeah.
It's always good when I've got questions coming in the question and answer and the chat function up all the time, because I'm dancing about between screens. Please, if you've got questions, comments, or anything else, please stick it in the question and answer function. It's just easier from my head. It's too early on a Thursday morning. Brilliant. One of the questions that came in was about additional modules. So access to bouldering walls or climbing walls at the moment might be slightly more difficult for certain groups. I know like disability groups may be one of those examples. So could there be, on top of this bouldering qualification, additional modules that can be added on to help access to certain groups, for certain groups?
Yeah, absolutely they can. And what we're looking at here is, if you like, a foundation qualification, and then you can build on that. Now, we've already got, as I say, the coaching pathway, which is very useful. That's you could call those modules in a way. Relative to this, because you do need a sort of a supervision qualification, whether it's in-house or a national qualification, to then hang the coaching schemes on. And so you could see something similar with the bouldering qualification, whether that's done as a module qualification or whether that's done as a sort of recognised CPD workshop module is another matter. There's already Climbing for All workshops, which have been in existence for quite a long time, very, very successful and very good. So I would argue that that's well recognised within the industry, and that people could already access those. But there will be lots of other things. You're quite right, but we need to get this kind of, I think, foundation qualification in place if we're to build a pathway for bouldering instructors.
There was a couple of comments that came in. These weren't really questions, but I'm going to ask a question on the back of them. There's a couple of comments coming in about, obviously, part of this bouldering qualification is to increase safety, hopefully reduce injuries, just building knowledge on how we can boulder more safely. And part of the big things that we know about bouldering safely is being able to land properly. And it's something that doesn't get touched on all that much, doesn't get discussed all that much, and I think I personally think it would be a big addition, would be talking about how people fall properly, land properly. And there are other sports that are quite far ahead of this, gymnastics, martial arts, those kind of sports that already look at this and already coach this kind of idea. So in the development of this, I'm making a big assumption that might be part of this, but will you be looking to link in with other sports and see how they do things and get ideas and get suggestions on how we can do things better?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, having run a bouldering wall as part of a larger climbing wall, I'm well aware of where all the accidents come from. My accident file was always at least 80% from the bouldering wall, and they would be, the usual poor landings, twist, sprains, etc. And so knowing how to fall and knowing how to teach falling, I can see as a really important component. And there's lots you can do on that. And as you say, other sports do stuff on that. And in fact, I've seen some really good practice in France as well with quite young kids, how that's done too. So that's definitely something that we can look into. Thank you.
So there's a couple of comments. Again, these are comments that people were given in answers to questions, and they're not really questions themselves. But I'm going to ask a question on the back of it. So there was comments around what the kind of layout or format of this might be. Whether mountain training have got any ideas at all at the moment. I know this is super early days, but any ideas at all at the moment? If it's a 1 day training and assessment, 1 day training, some consolidation time and assessment, or have you got any ideas at the moment what kind of format that you guys
I can give you a range of ideas. Okay, so if we're looking at something that is what I'd call fairly entry level, basic supervision and basic coaching concepts, not getting into much depth, but there needs to be something so that there's a quality session, like the session is structured and we have learning objectives and so forth. Then I think you could see something that was a day's training and maybe a half day's assessment. Almost all mountain training qualifications run broadly on the same principle, that we need people to have a basic minimum experience to be trainable as instructors. In other words, if they've never bouldered before, they should go off and get some bouldering experience first, because we're not there to teach them how to boulder. We're there to teach them how to instruct or coach or supervise bouldering. You do the training session, and then usually we will ask them to go through what's called a consolidation period. I'm not a fan of training and assessing in the same day necessarily, because you just repeat what you've been shown and get a tick. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone in and that you have connected with your own learning. So there's usually a consolidation phase, but how big that is, or the requirements, will depend on what the skills to be consolidated need to be. And then, as I say, I think it could be easily assessed if we're doing this sort of fairly entry-level thing in half a day or possibly slightly less. Now, the thing to add to that is we've introduced our first ever qualification, which is called the camping leader. Nothing to do with climbing, but we have. And in the case of that one, for the first time ever, the learning or the training component is entirely digital. So actually, they only have to turn up for the assessment. Now, I'm not suggesting that we would go 100% that way, because I think training people in how to manage people safely in a bouldering wall, I would guess, needs person-to-person training. It's all about being in the right position at the right time, looking in the right place, etc., and group management. But it might be that we could ease that training burden slightly by having a more blended model. So anyway, that's at that end. If people want the kitchen sink put in, two things happen. One is we need people to have more experience before they get on the scheme, and therefore there would be higher requirements for candidates to even get onto a scheme. And then, of course, the training and particularly the assessment, because there'd be more to assess, would grow. And that, of course, is more time and more expense. But my gut feeling, yeah, something around a day's training and maybe half a day's assessment, but it really does depend on the feedback we get as to what the outcome that people want is. Yeah.
Sorry, frantically typing in the background here. There was one comment that came in, a question that came in, trying to listen to all of this and type questions and read the question. It's a lot. I get it. So if you can't type and listen all at the same time, we can send our contact details are already out there. You can send we can send our contact details out again. If you want to ask questions or make comments or feed into this after this, feel free to. I'm sure Guy would absolutely love being bombarded with a million emails with a million questions.
Yeah, well, I've already had a few.
yeah. Brilliant.
I mean, that look, the bottom line is that's what I'm paid for. So, you know, if people want to email me, I guess we'll put my email up at the end of the session. Or unless you want to put it up now, I don't know. That's fine.
Brilliant. A couple of questions came in about who you guys are considering would deliver the Bouldering Qualification.
Yeah, I knew that was going to come up. I thought about, could I put something? It's a bit tricky because until we know what it is to be delivered, I'm not quite sure. What I will say, and obviously this is something that the working group will need to consider. What I can say is that the climbing wall instructor qualification, which is our only sort of full entry-level sort of independent instructor qualification at the moment, can be delivered by experienced people with the climbing wall development instructor qualification. So you can, you know, be working in a climbing wall and you can deliver that now. It used to be you had to have the mountaineering climbing instructors. We've moved on from that. But when it comes to the requirements to deliver any of our schemes now, we've moved on a little bit, and we, instead of saying, oh, you must just have this qualification, and this is particularly relevant to climbing walls because in the early days it was a mountaineering qualification to teach indoor climbing instructor courses. We're looking for what we call SCATE, which is relevant skills, knowledge, attributes or attitude, training and experience. So it is likely that whatever we come up with, it will be a slightly more, if you like, CV-based application than perhaps it has been in the past. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you've got masses of experience in the indoor world and you think you could deliver this scheme when we know what it is, then we'll want to hear from you. That's not the same as saying it's open season. You know, quality assurance is very important to us, but we're not just going to say you must have a mountaineering climbing instructor's qualification or worked as a technical advisor and then you're in. It's more complex and subtle than that, and we'll look a little bit more on a case-by-case basis, but there will be a minimum qualification. There has to, because it is something, and it will be a mountain training qualification somewhere, because that's what we know, and it's quality assured, and it means that those people understand mountain training processes too, because they've been through it, and if they're going to deliver them, then we'll need some knowledge. So as I say, the only parallel I can give at the moment is the climbing wall development instructor who deliver the climbing wall instructor qualification, and the working group will have to decide what is appropriate once we've worked out what it is to be delivered in the first place.
How does it work on the kind of backside? This may be an answer that a lot of people won't understand is, how does it work for you guys making sure there's not too many deliverers in the same area?
Yeah, so I was inducting new providers only last night. We keep fancy maps of the regions of Britain that show how many providers of each scheme we've got in each region. And we are trying to, whenever it's not, when we recruit new providers or course directors, it's not just, everybody who wants to come and do it. We tell people where we need delivery. Yeah. So if we know there's a particular part of the country where there's an oversupply, or we've got enough providers of that particular qualification, then we're less likely to take somebody on, because that's just all that happens then is you just undermine the provision that's in there in that part of the country already, and then courses don't get off the ground because there aren't enough candidates on them, and that's not good for the candidates who ultimately, we're here to serve the customer, not the provider. So yeah, we do try and balance that a bit. But of course, it's different if there's a new qualification, because that means there will be no providers anywhere in the country. So there will be no region of the country, if there were to be a new qualification, where we wouldn't be accepting applications.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you. Once all this is decided and what the content is going to be, if there is an overlap with some of the coaching pathway, the foundation coach, fundasses, whatever, if there does end up being an overlap, there's kind of two questions on this. Would there be the possibilities for exemption onto, could you get foundation coach as part of this as well? Maybe get an exemption that goes straight to development coach? Would this be replace CWI as an opportunity to get onto foundation coach? Obviously, CWI being a prerequisite for that. Would this replace CWI? And do you guys think that any overlap might dilute the coaching pathway in any way?
Yeah, okay. Let me unpack.
Right, that was a lot of questions in one there.
Yeah. No, it's all right. I get it though. This is the obvious thing is this. I think this is the biggest task actually for the working group. Designing a scheme and putting the content in there, once we've got a bit of a steer from all the feedback, is relatively easy. It's kind of our day job. It's what we do. It's working out the whole pathway so that we don't, as you say, duplicate anywhere or undermine existing qualification pathways, in this case the coaching qualification. There are possibilities of recognizing what we call accredited prior learning, which means sometimes there can be exemptions, but we don't want some messy system where people are sort of cherry picking bits and bobs. So I'd rather have a system that doesn't overlap, doesn't duplicate. But again, that's something that we will have to decide in the working group. It's the thing I most want to get right.
Yeah, I bet you. Yeah, it's going to be a tough ask creating a new course that kind of slots into a gap without stepping on toes of other things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the best parallel is the existing climbing wall instructor. And what happens if you go to on a 2-day, as it is, climbing wall instructor course, you are told a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff that's trained, and they're very packed courses. And in addition to all the sort of standard safety and supervision input that would need to be there, safeguarding is talked about, inclusion should be talked about, coaching in its very, very basic, what is coaching and what are you trying to achieve by it should be talked about. Some basic principles of fundamentals should be talked about, things like center of gravity and weight transfer, etc. And they need, any CWI at the very least needs to be aware of all those issues and their importance, so that then they can then go on and do coaching schemes, safeguarding courses, EDI courses, etc. And so it could be that is the parallel that we might do for a bouldering instructor. You can touch on these topics without undermining. If anything, actually, it can promote the coaching course, so that people then understand more about what they'd get out of the coaching scheme to enhance their bouldering instructor qualification, perhaps. So that's just a hypothesis.
Yeah. I realise the other panelists here have been rather quiet. Have you guys got any comments on anything that's been asked so far?
Yeah.
Go for it, Dave.
Yeah, if I may. Probably a throwback to, I was reading some of the answers from the attendees. There was the concern about provision and providers. People mentioned fundus in the south, fundus providers being few and far between. And I suppose from an industry perspective, one thing that might shed some light on where this could go. NICAS is quite key to a lot of commercial centres because it provides a revenue stream. So there's an incentive to comply with NICAS, and NICAS having fundus as a requirement for the the various different levels as a prerequisite for the instructors. That puts a pressure on commercial centres and employers to steer or provide fundamental 1 and 2 training for their employees. And it's just something I've observed time and time again. In Ireland, we've fewer providers even of fundus, and without generating any interest or marketing that kind of provision, we're constantly getting approached and requested to run courses. So I think from a like, the provision will be a concern if you take people in my position who we're employing a lot of people, we've got high staff turnover, and first priority for us is to ensure that customers safely, so they can safely engage with the sport and the facilities. So this bouldering level, you could argue that even before you reach the first or second clip on a lead climb, they're effectively everything that will be delivered in this course is relevant. Either effectively, there's no rope safety mechanism in place. So, at an entry level, a bouldering qualification will be, I'd imagine, there'll be a high commercial uptake. And then we trust with people who stay in the industry longer, having achieved that entry level qualification, will then, upscale and continue to invest in their own development. So the provisions and the providers, I could imagine them being a bit of a rush to get enough providers in place to fulfill the need, at least in the short term. And then it'll probably take a season or two to understand the ongoing level of demand for these courses.
Yeah, I mean, we are used to launching qualifications, and there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before they're launched. And one of the things we have to do is get a UK-wide network of providers in place, inducted, all resourced up, ready to go before we launch the thing publicly. And we've done that for a range of qualifications. We do have our climbing wall instructor providers in place, and I'm sure a number of them would want to deliver this. But we equally would be looking, to the sector for more people as well. So I would hope, because we've managed it before, that we can put good provision in, for the launch. Yeah. But you're right, it's always about balancing supply with demand.
Yeah. I suppose the CWI providers have their workload of capacity already addressed with their CWI courses, but much like bouldering versus rope climbing in terms of market penetration, customer retention, customer engagements, it's exponentially higher. Everything regards indoor bouldering. There's no barriers to participation, the competency, yes, the equipment, everything like that. It's just so accessible that I could easily see that there being a demand that's maybe abnormally high.
No, it's a good point. Good point.
It's just, not that we can't roll with it and make it work. It's just, I think that will be an issue. And some of the comments definitely highlighted the lack of provider access down south. So,
okay.
Good. What was that question that just came in there? The interesting question. is it possible that this award could become a prerequisite for CWI? I think, I'm not sure how that would fit in, given that they're both kind of bottom off that pathway that we've got there. They're both introductory things. I don't know, given that we've got bouldering only centres, rope only centres, mixed centres, I don't see how one would definitely 100% sit before another one. But how does mountain training feel about that?
I suppose my immediate thought would be, well, you will then introduce yet another quite significant component to gaining the CWI, and therefore you will make access to the climbing wall instructor more difficult, and that could be problematic for a lot of people. What I think might happen, because you find this over time, is the climbing wall instructor was first written. Obviously, bouldering was a thing, but it wasn't a thing like it is now. And so we may well find that if a bouldering instructor is established, that then influences the climbing wall instructor course to up its game a little bit with regard to the bouldering component. I think that might be a more likely scenario than linking the two, because we're very aware that if you start making access to gaining any qualification more difficult, you then get less qualified people, you then get less people useful to support activity.
Yeah. Touching on that, will the CWI, will the CWI still be seen as a suitable qualification for those working in a bouldering only facility? Or do you think that bouldering only facilities would recognise the bouldering qualification only?
Well, that's for the bouldering industry, sector to decide. I would hope so, but it's we've got a similar thing, haven't we? There used to be the SPA, now the rock climbing instructor, and that was designed so that you could use it both outdoors on the rocks, but also come indoors, and that is still the case. I'm not aware of many, or if any, climbing walls who refuse to let rock climbing instructors instruct in their wall, even though we now have the climbing wall instructor. My guess is that would be the way it would go. It's certainly not in people's commercial interest to start turning people away, unless they're, if we got feedback that the CWI was so inadequate from at least a safety point of view, and that people were starting to turn away CWI qualified people at bouldering walls, that would be a very different scenario, wouldn't it? Then we'd take action. But I don't think there's any benefit in cutting that down if it's working, which it appears to be. Yeah.
Sorry, bunch of questions all coming in at the same time there. Good. You touched on right at the very start that mountain training have kind of, for want of a better word, dismissed the idea of an outdoor bouldering qualification at the moment. But has that door been closed, or are you leaving that door open to reassess in the future based on feedback or the success?
Yes. No door is closed in the way that this has come around. The last time we assessed the need for an indoor bouldering qualification, we didn't think the market was quite there yet. And clearly things have developed and changed. Yes, somebody could have said back in 2016, well, you can see the way bouldering's going, can't you? But, there were capacity issues as well. So, of course, no, categorically, we're not closing the door on an outdoor bouldering qualification. But as ever, we will listen to what people want. We have to balance. There will always be people who will want a particular qualification that suits their particular situation and their needs, but we have to balance that against overcomplicating and over specializing and over compartmentalizing the qualification world. And we don't want to end up with a situation where you have to get 10 qualifications just to be able to cover your activities. That would equally clamp down on activity. So it's all about balance.
Are you reading frantically in the background? Is that what it is?
No, just scanning through the participants' comments. No,
there's some really good comments coming in. But do remind everybody that this is your chance to grill Guy. All the difficult questions, all the really difficult questions that you really going to mess with his head. This is your chance.
Yeah. Robert.
Yes,
Abby here. Hi. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on the requirements for NICAS or NICAS bouldering courses. So currently, minimum requirements that we have for delivery are site-specific assessment for coaches. And in terms of this new qualification in bouldering centres, then we would need to see exactly what would be involved in it for a start, and that's still under discussion. But for now, we would see it as something that's like good alongside. It's not going to suddenly tomorrow be a requirement. So just to sort of ease that in terms of the safe supervision, that's really important. And the site-specific training is about people being safe in walls and in sessions, taking part in NICAS bouldering. We also say that the schemes are, at the core of it is belief that quality coaching should begin with the first contact with climbing, which is why we promote Fundus and Foundation Coach and the Coaching Awards alongside any kind of safety and supervisory qualifications or training. So CWI as a requirement within NICAS bouldering, it is listed as something that could be useful at the higher levels, but it's not like mandatory, especially at the entry level. So if there's any specifics around how this could link in with NICAS, then we don't know the answers yet because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it will be definitely something that comes in over time and would probably be alongside what exists now rather than overtaking and like superseding.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think any of us here would like to see the bouldering qualification taking over from one of the other qualifications. I think having them all running side by side and as smooth a way as possible is definitely the way. Anita's asking that when you start running pilots, can they be on the first pilot? I'm sure lots and lots and lots of people would love to be on the first pilot, me being one of them as well.
To be honest, we probably won't run a pilot. We don't normally run pilots. We do so much consultation. There's so many people involved in setting these things up. Plus, we have been doing this for 60 years. We're more likely just to go large. It'll just launch and it'll be one day it won't be there. The next day it'll be, in theory, everywhere.
I appreciate the mountain training ethos of go big or go home.
Yeah.
Nice. Dave.
Yeah. But that's why we take so much time before we do it.
Dave, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, only in reply to a question from Sam, Bed Spider Climbing, about the registration fees or any costs, I suppose, when we're swapping out, particularly a large organization like the Spider Group, their site-specific training that they would have put a lot of their instructors through. We're swapping that for something that's more recognized and accredited and moderated. The question was really, will the fees dissuade people in terms of the uptake? And personally, as someone responsible for dealing with litigation and law cases and stuff like that, having a externally accredited qualification to support staff's expertise is a massive plus. I think the benefits outweigh the cons or the small cost you may incur to steer employees and instructors boards.
The other thing, just to follow up on that, is, having been in the situation today, running climbing wall and moving from in-house to national schemes when the then CWA, now CWI, came in, is that you fairly quickly transition to a situation where the majority of your staff, or at least where the part of the country I was in, the majority of your staff that you recruit already have the qualification. So that expense is taken off you. Yeah. Now, there'll be a transition period, and I'm sure there'll be lots of walls, particularly for their existing in-house staff. If they want them to have that qualification, they may well fund some of that. But what you will arrive at is a situation that, a year or two or more down the line, where the expectation is, if you want a job in a bouldering wall or a climbing wall, you'll need to have the base qualification. And that's certainly the way it's gone with the climbing wall instructor. So, yeah, in the end, walls will have the choice, because obviously in-house schemes are still always going to be relevant in certain situations, but they will have the choice basically to outsource that to the national scheme. Anna's got her hand up, I think.
Yeah, Anna.
Yes, I have. Anna, ABC. I know some people can't see our names, so quick intro. Yes. I just wanted to raise, I've seen a couple of comments about accessibility throughout the training and the scheme, and I just wondered how fundamental you're planning for that to be, how much thought's gone into that so far, and whether you're are going to take external consultation on that.
Absolutely. If you're talking about accessibility as in inclusion, and people's differing needs, this is something that is now core to mountain training's ethos and philosophy. I can tell you we have something called a reasonable adjustments policy for a start. All of our providers are trained in EDI. We've just run a series of 4 workshops for all of our providers recently. We estimate we've given 600 reasonable adjustments to our training and assessments just in the last year. It's just so core to our strategy and what we do now. And of course, bouldering is just a brilliant opportunity to get people with various needs, disabilities, diversity involved in, if you like, a leadership role. And that's just a massive opportunity for us and for the sector.
So I interpreted the questions, and certainly my point of view, I was thinking a little more, how will the people on the qualification be equipped to properly and sensitively deliver for those with a wide variety of accessibility needs and considerations?
Yeah, okay. So we now have access to EDI and safeguarding specialists amongst the partners, but particularly through the BMC. We are a sort of what we call a sort of funded partner coalition, and we work very closely on this. So we've got access to really good input on that. And I think we will want to make both those things, safeguarding and equity, diversity and inclusion in particular, core to this qualification. Now, I don't mean that therefore there'll be, a huge amount of the syllabus dedicated to it. I think, people would expect specialist safeguarding courses and possibly even EDI workshops to be something that employers would encourage their staff to go on anyway. But I think from the first moment of any training course, I think those things have to be highlighted, because to me, that is fundamental to the role of what a coach, instructor, guide, leader, as I say, is all about. You need to be able to be there for everybody. You need to know what you can and can't do, and where you can refer to for support if you're not sure how to manage certain different groups and individuals. And you need to understand that safeguarding is not just something about, reporting, how to report if an incident has happened. It's nothing. It is to do with that, but what it's really about is positive practice, good coaching behaviours, so that you set a safe space, should we say, and a positive learning environment for people. To me, that's just the 101 of what being an instructor coach is all about. And you can't cover it all, but you can highlight it right at the beginning and go, this is something you need to be thinking about every minute that you are in contact with people, because you are in a position of power by dint of your role. It's a risk activity. People can be nervous for all sorts of reasons, and it's your job to put them at ease and to make sure that they feel safe in order to be able to learn and participate as best they can.
Guy, do you want a big question first or a small question first?
Go on with throw me the big one.
The big one.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of questions, comments coming in about the significance or the relevance of in-house training these days, whether insurers still accept in-house training, whether it's appropriate, whether there's still a place for it. I'm sure that we're all probably pretty aware that insurance at the moment is probably one of the biggest challenges the climbing industry is seeing. Insurers, will most likely, given the way things are going, get more tight, get more expensive. But as far as I know, anyway, HSE, their levels of competency, in-house training is still included in that, alongside nationally recognised qualifications. But where does Mountain Training feel that in-house training sits with all of the qualifications that you guys run?
Well, we've always subscribed. HSE don't exactly describe routes to competency this way anymore, but I think it still is worthy of note that they always used to talk about 4 routes to competency, and a national qualification being the first one, qualification being the second, and an in-house one, and then finally by dint of experience. But that 4th one is a bit misleading because it's quite difficult to prove that, and there's certainly no insurer I know who would go, oh, your experience, great, we'll insure you. They'd want to see a bit more than that, as would a judge. So we subscribe to that. We think there's always a place for in-house training. I did just as much in-house training to other climbing walls as I did mountain training when I was a provider and working in climbing walls. And I think for a whole host of reasons that I won't get into now, there will always be a place for in-house training. But you're right. It's undeniable that it's not just insurers, it's grant funders, it's local authorities, it's school governing boards, all the rest of it. They are increasingly looking for some assurance of standard. Yeah. And of course, that is Mountain Training's brand. I said before, our brand stands for 2 things more than anything else. One is quality assurance, and the other is governance. And by governance, I mean that it's what we're doing right now is we are consulting with the sector, the industry. We have lots of people that sit on our council, which represent national organisations, whether they be, outdoor education advisors or mountain rescue or, all this sort of stuff. And they all support what we do. They basically endorse our qualifications. Well, an insurer is going to take note of that, as is a judge, and that's, if you like, the power of a national qualification along with its quality assurance. And the rest is really for conversations between individual centres and their insurers. But I do know some of these insurers, and I do talk to them, and I know how they think. They're going to make a risk assessment like anybody else.
Dave, you got your hand up?
Yeah. Only in that insurance and navigating insurance has kind of been the bane of my existence for the last few years. I think Ireland's probably a few steps down a path that hopefully the UK industry doesn't follow. In terms of, we had key insurers exit the market a number of years ago, 2020, resulting in the mass closure of leisure centres, activity centres, play centres, and even a couple of climbing walls just having to go into trading as self-insured and things like that. So it can transpire to be very problematic. However, one thing I'd flag regarding the question on in-house training, I think the weakness in in-house training. So firstly, I completely value it, and I do think it's applicable, and I'd completely agree with Guy in terms of the gravitas that the quality of a national qualification brings will always be recognised. But not to say that in-house training can't, but its weaknesses in the delivery, the record keeping, the standards and the moderation of it. So like having an in-house training policy is all well and good, ensuring that it's delivered fairly and consistently across all employees, and that records are kept and moderation is made and recorded. All those things will, make that, in-house training package watertight in terms of or at least will help towards that in a legal circumstance. And I think a lot of the centres fall down. They have a very well conceived in-house training scheme, but they don't really deploy it consistently enough for it to be useful to them in a legal instance. So and that's what mountain training bring to the deployment of this kind of qualification. There's a huge amount of background and infrastructure that ensures the delivery, the standardization. It becomes the industry norm, and it's that's its strength. So I can see both working, but I can see how in-house can fail.
Yeah. Abby, you got your hand up. Sorry, I can see you frantically typing away in the background.
I was typing at the same time. So I think my point was going to be along the lines of, the NICAS schemes are there to be, the benefit of them is being nationally recognised, quality assured, and having a consistent national standard to be portable, which is exactly what Guy has put in his presentation about all the benefits of having this as a qualification. So in terms of having a baseline and something that people can recognise, what are the core things that have been taught, learnt by taking part in this scheme or this qualification, I think that is where we see benefits of being involved in developing this qualification, and having links in with mountain training, what it's doing as it links in with NICAS training. Let's say currently site-specific assessment by a competent person is our entry level, and it would be, this would be something that could sit alongside that, I imagine, once it's been developed. And I had another point. No, I can't think what it was. But yeah, essentially, we would see that having this would add value, because all involved in the climbing world, and that includes participants and parents as well, would be able to see these are the things that have been taught, these are things that this person's learned, and these things that are being delivered. And it's a bit easier to see what that standard is, or what's involved in it. Yeah. But also just on training, that is something that having a qualification is a one-off process. Training of staff and ongoing development is also going to be important, and something that would continue, I believe, alongside a qualification. So having inductions, having ongoing CPD, etc. A lot of the points that have been raised, I think, could also be covered through some of that. It's not from now on, this qualification is the only way to gain some of the learning.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that point. Sorry for trying to multitask.
No, that's quite all right. That's what I've been doing this whole time as well.
There's one little thread that's kind of just streaming through. So some people perceive maybe a qualification new that is an option to replace in-house training as restrictive in some way, or they don't like the freedom that their in-house models afford them. But I just think as a whole, between Abby's comments about NICAS, their values and the portability of the NICAS product, and this obviously offering that same portability to providers around locations and around the country. There's other developments that move towards standardizing the indoor sector, particularly like the RSD route setting developments and the ABC's work on that. So there are things coming that will, all this culminates to provide a picture of a very professional, a safe, a standardized and moderated industry, which I think will ultimately just safeguard our world, really. So I don't think any pushback in terms of the perceived loss of freedom to manage your location or your coaching activities locally in the way you want. I think these kind of nationwide standardization steps are actually really, really good, and they add strength to the industry that maybe we're focused obviously on one part of that process, but I think it's happening in multiple areas of the industry, and it's all going to be very well received by the insurance sector.
Guy, I think you touched on this briefly at the start, but there was a question that came in around the scope of the format of this being one-day training and assessment. I think you touched on it at the start and said that you're not totally in favour of it. I personally can see a lot of value in it. I understand where you're coming from. I personally would see a lot of value in being able to do that to make it as accessible as possible for the most number of people. But is that something that there's still scope for, or is that something Mountain Training don't agree with?
Yeah, I've probably given too much of my personal opinion there. Obviously, we'll talk about this at the working group. All I'd say is that there is, and this can be working against us as much as for us, but there's a very, I suppose, established, I suppose you could call it culture in mountain training, of the sort of the structure of registration, training, consolidation, and then assessment. And because most of our qualifications require people to work in a fairly flexible environment, we're not on a tennis court with lines where, the ball's either in or out. The nature of the activities that we want people to be able to lead require decision making. Decision making requires experience, and just attending a course is not the whole part of the training package, if that makes sense. In order to develop those skills, it's a bit like think of teacher training. You wouldn't put somebody on a teacher training course for, a month and put them through a load of lectures and then just throw them in the classroom and say, there you go, you know what you're doing. You do need to practice and gain experience. And, this is why you could argue that the insurers and others, rate our qualifications, is that we are not trying to do things by shortcut. We need to let people develop both through training input, but also through practice and consolidation, and then assessment. Now, of course, the pedagogy of that we can look at, and we have started doing digital training, for example, with one other qualification. And it does give us the opportunity to, blend the learning, even possibly blend the assessments that could then make it more accessible. So
cool.
Beyond that, I can't say, but the first thing is to decide what it is we want the outcomes to be. Yeah. And then we'll look at what we think are the most effective ways of delivering them.
Yeah.
Sorry to be slippery.
No, that's quite all right. I think we all understand this is the very start of the journey, so a lot of answers can't be given right now. I am conscious on time, so I'm going to ask one more question before we wrap it up. But like I said, any of the questions that I haven't got to during this, we will be getting answers for and sent out to you in time. This is a slightly curveball one, maybe slots into the middle for you. So an interesting one to end on. Obviously, we're looking at the indoor boulder qualification, and Mountain Training said that they are not looking at the outdoor bouldering qualification at the moment. But how does that fit in with outdoor artificial climbing structures? Because there are quite a few of them around, and they are artificial structures just like any indoor.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I did actually, I should have picked up in my little slides where it said something like the rationale for indoor bouldering qualification. I put a little asterisk on the indoor because, of course, the proper term would be ACS, an artificial climbing structure. The CWI is the same. You can use your climbing wall instructor qualification outdoors on artificial climbing structures. And I would assume, again, we'll look at it, but I would guess that that's what we would be looking at. So if there are outdoor artificial boulders with appropriate safety flooring, then that could be all part of the scope.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much to all of our attendees, and I think you can all give all of our panelists a brilliant round of applause. Well done. Thank you very much, everybody. That was really interesting, really insightful, and good to know where Mountain Training heads are and how things are developing, and the kind of process and the timeline behind all that as well. I think it's a thing that a lot of people don't quite grasp, the kind of timeline and the process that goes behind developing these kind of qualifications. So brilliant. Thank you very much to Guy for giving us that insight and being as open and honest as he can, not giving away too many trade secrets yet, but we'll get them one day. And thank you to our other panelists, Abby, Anna, Dave and Dan. You guys have been brilliant in this. Thank you very much. Yes, like I said, the questions and answers that I haven't got to, we will be getting answers for them and sending them out in time. This was recorded and will be going up on the YouTube again in time. And yeah, if you have any other questions, comments, things you want to talk to Guy about, things you want to talk to Abby about, or Anna about, Dan, Dave, myself, if you want to get in touch and just feedback and try and feed into this conversation, we would all massively appreciate it, I'm sure. So our contact details can be pinged out to you guys in time. Likewise, our contact details are on all of our websites. So
yeah, and if I could just add, Robert, it's just brilliant to get feedback. Obviously, I've been chatting today now, but we will look at the working group at all the feedback. It's really valuable. Treat this like a large focus group. So thank you very much. And my email, I'll just say it, but I'm sure I'll get it sent out, is just Guy, G-U-Y, and then it's mountain-training.org. And if you want to send me any comments, then, that's what we're here for. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Right. Well, I'll let you all go. Thank you very much once again. We will see you hopefully at the next webinar that is in development at the moment. More details about that will come out very soon. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Good to see you all. Take care. Have a lovely day. See ya.